most of Russian journalists, in fact, are gone precisely because the life is like that. They can be beaten up, they're harassed. And it was also, it's not just a journalist, it was also a lawyer. They were there together.
Let's speak now to Nina Krushcheva, who is Professor of International Affairs and Nikita Khrushchev's granddaughter. Good morning, Nina.
Hi, good morning.
Good to speak to you. So this has been 100 days that Evan Gershokovich has been held by Russia. Why do you think Moscow is picking this fight?
Well, I think actually, I mean, there've been talk that he was followed and it was planned. The way I see it, from what I know, it almost seemed like he was just a convenient patsy for that. He went to Ekaterinburg, to the city that has been questioned whether that is a loyal, patriotic city, because it was the city where Boris Yeltsin, the first Russian president, came from, and Ivan was asking questions about Prigozhin, and he was dealing there with a very kind of prominent and quite self-aggrandizing PR person, and so just brought himself to the radar of the FSB, the security force. It's like, oh, that seems like a good case for spying here. So they picked him up. And since they picked him up, now they're not going to release him until there is really a very good deal for them to be made.
We talk about that deal because there is some speculation that there might be a prisoner swap on the cards. Do you think that's likely?
Not from what I'm seeing. I mean, it is, of course, it's likely. It's absolutely possible. But what we've seen, though, I mean, we saw it with the basketball player, I forgot her first name, Brittany Griner.
Yeah.
Right, Brittany Griner last year, is that she was given an enormous sentence. So then she could be swapped as if she's a high-level target for something grand. And so I would imagine that in this case also, Ivan would get some sort of a sentence, probably a large sentence, not predicting, I'm just kind of analyzing for what we've seen before, large sentence, and then it would be dealt with as if it's some just sort of a grand favor on the Russian part to release him because he was such an important and high valued spy. So that's my reading of it, that he would probably be in prison until August 30th, and then there would be some sort of a sentence, and then only after that, I think there would be a deal, unless there is some very important back channels going on we just simply don't know about.
I mean, this is the first arrest of an American journalist in, 40 years?
Yes, the first, the previous one was Nicholas Daniloff, U.S. News and World Report in September 1986. So it's almost 40 years.
And you knew him, I understand.
Well, I knew him a little bit. I think he was friendly with my mother, and I met him a couple of times. Actually, sort of for comparison, I find it kind of remarkable because we think correctly, that the Soviet Union was just sort of such a prison of nations. And let's remember that Danilov was arrested early September and was released in 2 weeks. And, by the end of September, he was already back in the United States. So the Soviets needed to make a point. They arrested him because the Americans arrested somebody else, some Soviet out there. But then they just didn't want to deal with other problems. And the interesting thing about this particular regime, the Putin regime, is that when it makes these KGB decisions, they're just sticking to them, no matter how senseless and useless they are. They're just doing it because that's how they show their power. Also, of course, 86 was already Mikhail Gorbachev was in the head of Russia, and so he certainly would not want to jeopardize his relationship or budding relationship with the United States with this arrest of Danilov.
When we look at the backdrop in Russia, in Moscow at the moment, when we think about what's happened with Prigozhin in recent weeks, with Wagner, Putin's wanting to look strong at the moment. Does that play into how he may deal with Evan Gershokovich's case? Is that worse news for Evan?
I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure, because one of the things that you see in Moscow now is that it is thoroughly discombobulated. I mean, it shows strength on one hand and it just immediately dismisses it with its other hand. I mean, the thing about Prigozhin, for example, every TV channel, and most of them are actually pretty much all of them are Kremlin related, they're absolutely thrashing Prigozhin. He was a mutiny, he was a traitor, this and that. And yet we're also seeing that suddenly his computer and his phone and his money and his guns, all of it was given back to him. And he's wandering around Moscow, St. Petersburg once in a while. He's not even in Minsk. So the amount of incoherency is staggering. I mean, it's really the Orwellian level of incoherency of that state. So I think for Gershokovich, it's a separate case with the United States that is going to go on the same way it was going to go on, I think, but could be, I don't know.
I want to ask you as well about the reports in recent days of this Russian journalist who was beaten up in Chechnya. I mean, what is life like for journalists in Russia now?
Well, most of Russian journalists, in fact, are gone precisely because the life is like that. They can be beaten up, they're harassed. And it's not just a journalist, it was also a lawyer. They were there together to go to the trial of a mother of an opposition, another opposition lawyer there. And so they were already threatened before. In fact, Elena Milashin, it wasn't the first time she was beaten up in Chechnya. And, the talk, in fact, because she represents Novaya Gazeta, the newspaper whose editor, Dmitry Muratov, 2 years ago, I think, became a Nobel Prize winner, Peace Nobel Prize winner. And the question even in Moscow is that why would Muratov allow them to go? Why would allow her to go? Because she was already harassed there before. But he says that he couldn't stop her. So she went and expectedly she would be harassed once again. So that story is not even unusual. It's horrible, but it's not unusual. The more unusual part of it is suddenly the Kremlin has become a defender of a journalist of an oppositional newspaper that the Kremlin closed, and now suddenly they want to investigate. And that, from my point of view, is directly connected to the Prigozhin case. Because Ramzan Kadyrov, the president of Chechnya, has been as vocal as Prigozhin is, kind of, oops, we need more war. We are the heroes of all this. And so the message now, because they were thinking, beating up the journalist and the lawyer, is that they are doing a favor to Kadyrov and the Kremlin. And suddenly it becomes a problem because the Kremlin and its message of we are investigating is to cut down Kadyrov to size, is to say, whatever it is, if we are oppressing, it's on the part of the Kremlin. Nobody randomly oppresses or beats up or creates its own law when it's not sanctioned by the Kremlin.
Gosh, Nina, thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That is Nina Krushcheva, Professor of International Affairs and Nikita Khrushchev's granddaughter.